about halacha, Jewish law, and we now are in the middle of a series called the laws of meat and milk. You know, we learned about meat and milk, and you've probably heard, I'm sure you know, everybody knows that we Jews don't mix meat and milk. But what exactly does that mean? What entails mixing? So we've learned that you're not supposed to have meat and milk in the same meal. So let's say you ate milk. The meal's over. How long do you have to wait? The general consensus is 1 hour. That's certainly the Chabad custom. But the lowest standard is to merely wash your hands, wash your mouth out, and to cleanse your mouth, and rinse your mouth out. To eat something dry and to like bread, and to wash your mouth and then to wash your hands. That's the shortest wait after milk before you eat meat. However, meat is different. Once you eat meat, it sticks around a lot longer, and that's why after meat, you have to wait 6 hours before you can eat milk. After meat, you have to wait 6 hours. That we gave two reasons when the last time we learned this. You'll find the class on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. You'll find the answer as to why it is that the various reasons, all the things that we spoke about. The basics that we've learned were that the Torah says 3 times you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. 3 times. The redundancy teaches us. The oral law tells us that the redundancy is there for a reason, to teach us, number 1, not to cook them together. Number 2, not to eat them together. And number 3, not to benefit from meat and milk that were cooked together. No eating, no cooking, no benefiting, right? Now, why do we have to wait 6 hours? The basic reason is because, it says in the Zohar, you're not supposed to eat them in the same meal. So since you're not supposed to eat them in the same meal, 6 hours is the amount of a meal. Every 6 hours you're supposed to eat breakfast, lunch, and supper. If you eat at sunrise and lunchtime and sunset, that's 6 hours in between. So that's why we wait 6 hours. However, there's further reasons explained. Last time we said that the meat gets stuck. The meat is tough and it gets stuck in between your teeth. And a second reason is because there's still the flavor of the meat in your digestive system for 6 hours. And those were the details until which point we've reached in our study of the laws of waiting after meat for milk. And today we're going to get down into the details as to special cases and application of the law of waiting after meat for milk. So here goes. So how much time do we have to wait? We said that according to the Code of Jewish Law, you wait 6 hours, right? And that's the Sephardic custom. That's what it says in the Code of Jewish Law. However, in their Ashkenazi custom, there is a custom brought down in Jewish law to wait only 1 hour after meat, which is enough to switch meals. But that ruling in the Code of Jewish Law says that it is certainly better to wait the full 6 hours, and that is how we rule. So according to the Ashkenazi custom, remember, when the Code of Jewish Law was written, there were 2 authors to the Code of Jewish Law, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi, and they interpolated them. So the Sephardi follow the Sephardic Code of Jewish Law, and the Ashkenazim follow the Ashkenazi Code of Jewish Law. Rabbi Moshe Isserlich of Krakow, known as the Ramah. So even though they both agree that you have to wait 6 hours, the Ramah, the Ashkenazi custom, the Ashkenazi position does introduce a position which isn't the binding rule, but at least we should know that there is such a position to wait merely 1 hour after meat for milk. But it does seem to be the general consensus, the final ruling according to everybody across the board, that you are supposed to wait 6 hours, which means like this. If you're on your spiritual journey right now, this is what I think you should do. If you feel, good morning, Marty and Dean. Nice to see you guys in the lane. Sorry we were late today, by the way. We had a beautiful minyan outdoors. Someone was saying Kaddish, and we had a breakfast with Danishes and donuts and Danishes and coffee. So it took a little longer. I apologize. If you're at the beginning of your spiritual journey, I think you could be easier on yourself. But if you're a little more advanced, knowledge is power. So if you're a kind of person that's not really eating kosher at this time, I think that you could be a little lighter on yourself as you take baby steps towards kosher. Easy come, easy go, slow to come, slow to go. So I would encourage you at the very least to separate meat and milk, not to eat them at the same time, to wait after milk. No time at all, just to wash your hands, wash your mouth, and cleanse your mouth with a cake or a dry food. But after meat, at the very least, you should wait 1 hour. 1 hour. You ate meat at 1 o'clock, you shouldn't eat milk before 2 o'clock. But if you are more spiritually advanced and you know where you stand with your relationship with Hashem, then you should certainly say, you know what? It's about time we upgrade, right? We upgrade to 6 hours. And it's a beautiful thing. You when you eat, we Jews, we eat with our eye on the watch. We're like, okay, it's 6:47 right now. I'm not going to be able to eat until 12:47. The cup of coffee, sometimes late at night when I'm having a midnight snack, I think to myself, oh boy, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if I'll be able to have my cup of coffee if I have this piece of salami. So got to be thinking about that, right? But I think that it's a beautiful thing to upgrade towards, right? Practically speaking, we wait 6 full hours. And in case where you have no choice, for example, if you're in the army, right? And army doesn't exactly have normal meal times. Then you can be more lenient. Okay, now what happens if you're not sure about how much time has passed? Let's apply the law a little bit. So you're not sure exactly how much time has passed. You forgot what time you ate. So some opinions say that you have to wait until you know for sure that 6 hours have passed. So you're not sure if you ate at 1 or 2, right? So you go according to the time that you know for sure you were finished eating. Other commentaries say that it's okay to actually be lenient and say that you don't have to wait until you know for sure when you were finished eating. You can just rough it out. You can sort of round it off. Especially, by the way, if the meat that you ate was not beef, if it was actually poultry. Now, poultry is only considered meat according to rabbinic prohibition. The real prohibition of meat and milk is beef and milk. We're going to talk about this in just a few moments. Poultry was a rabbinic decree because it's similar to beef. Now, even though that's 100% binding, the prohibition of the rabbinic law makes it just as prohibited as Torah law. Nevertheless, because it is actually a rabbinic addition, you can be more lenient if your doubt revolves around the eating of poultry in your last meal, as opposed to your eating of meat, of beef. And so has ruled the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, and he passed away, Harav Ovadia Yosef. Now, when should you start your wait? Please, by the way, post your comments or questions in the chat box, and I'll be checking them periodically. Good morning, Corey. And if you're listening later, then send me an email, rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. It's beautiful to see, Marty, that ever since you were a child, you never ate milk and meat together, which is really beautiful. That, notwithstanding every person's own spiritual status with regards to tefillin or Shabbos or yarmulke or tzitzis or talis or whatever, that's your special thing, and it's a beautiful thing to see. You never mix meat and milk. Beautiful. Love it. By the way, Marty, so if you never mix meat and milk, so let me ask you this question. So how long do you wait? What is your custom at this time after eating meat and milk? And how long do you wait when you say you don't eat them together? And maybe it's time to consider, if you don't yet do the 6 hours, maybe it's time to upgrade, right? It's good for your diet also. Everybody's into diets today. I don't eat this. I don't eat gluten. I don't eat wheat. I don't eat dairy. I don't eat lactose, whatever. Right. Okay. Now, how long, when do you start to wait? So do you start, so the opinions rule like this. You're supposed to wait from the end of the meal, from the end of the meat meal. That's when you start counting 6 hours. Which means that if you had a main course of meat for lunch, let's say, and then came dessert, which was parev, and let's say the dessert took 45 minutes. You were chatting, there was tea, there was dessert after the meat. You're supposed to start counting 6 hours from the benching, from when you did the grace after meals. And that's again the ruling of the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. However, that's basically when you're supposed to wait from. Now, interesting, if you had lunch, you had meat during lunch, but you didn't actually say the grace after meals, even though you're waiting 6 hours. You know, some meals last like 6 hours. You're just sitting around the table. It's amazing. Everyone's having a good time, right? You're sitting around the table. So if you didn't actually say the grace after meals, it could be 8 hours later. It's still considered the same meal. And therefore, you're not allowed to eat milk if you haven't said the grace after meals to close out the previous meal. Because remember, the Zohar says that you can't eat meat and milk in the same meal. Some meals last a week. They last a day, you know. They could last a whole day. If you haven't said the grace after meals to close out the previous meal, then you're not allowed to eat milk even if it's 8 hours later. Okay, now, in that case, let's say you bench 6 hours after you finished eating. You're like, oops, I forgot to bench. And we've been sitting around the table. In that case, you can just bench and then eat the dairy afterwards because you haven't eaten meat in so long. How long do you have to wait? So you have to wait the 6 hours until you begin your dairy meal, which means even though there's an appetizer, which is parev, you can't even wash your hands for the dairy meal until the end of 6 hours. Again, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel says you don't need to wait the 6 hours until the beginning of the meal. He rules that you have to wait the 6 hours until the actual eating of the dairy, which means, let's say you had lunch at 12 o'clock, you had beef. And then at 5 o'clock, you want to start your dairy meal. But you know that the main course, the dairy, is not going to be served until 6. But at 5 o'clock, that's when you have the appetizers. The cocktail hour opens up at 5 o'clock. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the Sephardic chief rabbi, says you can do that. You can start the dairy meal earlier as long as you're not eating the actual dairy. Okay, now what is considered meat and what is considered milk? Like when we're separating the meat and the milk, what exactly are we separating? What exactly are we separating between? Let me just go to the questions a second. I see that Rob is incredulous to Marty Knopf. You've never had a cheeseburger. And I think the answer would be no. Marty, good for you. Absolutely. The question is a cheeseburger a mixing of meat and milk? That's what we're about to learn. I know that sounds a little weird because it's like, obviously, Rabbi, like obviously a cheeseburger is a mix of meat and milk. The answer is not necessarily. You'll see in a moment why. Marty says at least a couple of hours. Fantastic. Maybe it's time to upgrade to the full 6 hours. Right? Corey, what about chicken soup with no chicken but just veggies? What is that? What is a chicken soup with no chicken but just veggies? If it has no chicken, then why is it chicken soup? I don't understand this. Why would you need to wait 6 hours if it's just liquid? So I'm going to assume that what makes a chicken soup is because it's got the chicken flavor. Mark, guys, I'm teaching a class, okay? So I'm going to assume that the reason, Corey, why it is considered chicken soup is because it's got the chicken flavor, but not the actual chicken. So that's why it's 100% chicken. It's 100% fleishik, which means that the prohibition of meat and milk is not the actual meat and the actual milk. It's the flavor that is prohibited. It's the taste of chicken and the taste of milk. So that should answer your question, Corey. If you have the taste of chicken, it's fleishik. That's it. It is chicken. Now, we're not talking about fake chicken. Like, you know, they have fake crab. You go to a kosher restaurant, there's fake crab, there's fake eel, there's fake this, fake that. When I was growing up, we had in South Africa fake, no, it's called mock crayfish. I don't know if they have crayfish in this country, but it's called mock crayfish. It was like I don't know, I think of crayfish as a crab or something. And it was called mock crayfish. Now, it might taste like crayfish or crab or whatever, but it's not. So that's kosher if it's not actual. But if you have a chicken and you put it into a soup and it's got the flavor of the chicken, but you took out the chicken, the flavor is still there, and that's why it's still fleishik. So hopefully that answers your question. And Marty, there you go. He never had a cheeseburger in his life. Good for you. You make it with chicken, you take the chicken out. Therefore, it's got the flavor of chicken. So let's talk about cheeseburgers. Why is a cheeseburger not necessarily the prohibition of meat and milk? The reason is this. It's only when you eat actual beef of an animal or poultry. It's not only actual meat that you have to wait after, but even something in which meat was cooked, like chicken soup, which has no actual chicken inside, or a chicken soup that has only vegetables inside, or maybe vegetables that were cooked together with chicken or meat, And now you're not eating the chicken, you're not eating the meat, but since they were cooked together, the flavor of the chicken and the meat is now inside of those vegetables. Right? For example, you make a cholent on Shabbos, right? So it's cooking the cholent, and now all you ate was a potato from inside the cholent. It's obviously got a flavor of the meat in there. Since these foods have the flavor of the meat inside, therefore they're considered meat. And you have to wait after them 6 hours. That is the definition of the meat and milk. You have to wait after the flavor of the meat, not necessarily the meat itself. Same thing with regards to dairy. It's not only the actual dairy that you have to wait after, it's anything which has the flavor of the dairy, even if it doesn't actually have cheese in it. A food which has only a little bit of meat in it, to the point that the meat is doesn't even feature. It's like you don't even notice that the meat is in there, and it doesn't influence the flavor of the food. For example, if you have a pareve salad and somebody mixed in a dirty spoon, like a dirty meat spoon, and maybe there's a tiny bit of a tiny bit of oil on the spoon that wasn't cleaned, and it's put into the pareve salad, but you don't see it. Then you're allowed to eat that salad together with milk. Why? Because the little tiny drop of meat flavor that would have come off of that spoon is not enough to give meat flavor to the salad, and therefore the salad doesn't become fleshik. That it all comes to the same point, that if it's the flavor that's prohibited, it's not the actual meat that's prohibited. So it works both ways. If the flavor is there without the actual meat, then it's fleshik. But if the flavor is not there because it's so minuscule, then it's not fleshik. Obviously, if you see the remnants of the flesh inside of the salad, you got to take them out. You can't say, well, that's not important. You got to take them out. But if they're invisible and it's minuscule influence of meat flavor into the pareve salad, then it's not enough to make that salad fleshik. So, for example, if you want another example, if you ate meat, right, and now you want to drink a cup of coffee or tea, and inside of the coffee or tea, which is pareve tea or pareve coffee, you want to add in a little bit of sugar, and into that sugar, someone had earlier put in a dairy spoon, like a dirty dairy spoon. So if somebody put a dirty dairy spoon into the sugar bowl, then the little tiny bit of leftover dairy that might have seeped into that sugar bowl is so minuscule, it's not enough to render the sugar dairy to make it so dairy that you can't have the tea within 6 hours of the meat meal, because there's not enough flavor to influence it. But if the leftovers of the meat do influence the taste of the food, everything becomes fleshik, and everything necessitates a 6 hour wait. I'm just trying to think a second. One second, hold on. Everything necessitates a 6 hour wait. What is the definition of influencing flavor? We have the principle of 1 in 60th. 1 in 60th. So if you have if the infusion of dairy into the meat, or the infusion of dairy is 1/60th or less, sorry, if there's more than 1 in 60 parts, then you'll feel the flavor. But if there's less than 1 part out of 60, you won't feel the flavor. That's the taste test that the Talmud rules, the oral Torah rules. 1 part of 60, you will taste. But if you put a little tiny bit of dairy, of milk, into something the size of a swimming pool, you're never going to taste it when you drink the water from the swimming pool, the size of the swimming pool, because it's just diluted. But if you put a little tiny drop, like a teaspoon of milk, into a cup of water, then that water will actually have the flavor of the milk, right? Corey, I thought it was all about the digestion of the meat before you can eat dairy. Yeah, we said that. Didn't we say that before? I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I did say that before, that it takes 6 hours to digest. Marty, it's a mini lobster. You're talking about the mock crayfish. That's right. I remember now, my son told me that he was catching them in the summertime up in the mountains. Isn't there a kazayas minimum? I'm not sure what you're referring to, Corey, because I believe we're talking about the infusion of the flavor at 1/60th. Elaine, there are non-dairy substitutes, but they look like the dairy product. Is that a problem? That's an interesting question. So let's say you're having a fleischig wedding, and at the end of the wedding, you want to serve a dairy. You want to serve coffee with milk, but the milk is obviously kind of real milk, so you use non-dairy creamer. Because of a concept called maris ayin. A maris ayin means the perception of the eye. You have to actually make a sign out there that says, you actually have to state this is non-dairy creamer. Or you could put out the actual bottle of the creamer that people can see that it's a non-dairy creamer. Because otherwise, there's a problem of perception, of mistaken perception, which we have to always be mindful of. Which is an interesting concept. If I was a rabbi, I can't just, do things that might be perceived as, they might be mistaken. So, for example, I've got to be mindful of the fact that people are watching me and they might get the wrong perception. So you got to be careful about where you are and what you're doing, and that if you're, let's say, if you're, you would never want to go into a treifa restaurant, because if you're in a treifa restaurant, then then you're people might think, oh, it's a kosher place because the rabbi's here. But then in certain cases, what you could do is you have to bring like a sign to show that you're not eating from the restaurant. Like, let's say, there's rabbinic rulings that if you go into a treifa restaurant for whatever reason, if you bring like styrofoam, which is clearly not what they eat from in the restaurant, they eat from fine china. So there was a ruling I saw once that if you bring in styrofoam, then it's obvious that you're not eating from the restaurant. It's very, very clear. It's interesting, depending on the rabbi. Corey, my father would never allow margarine on the table when we ate meat because of how it looked. Okay, so if you had the actual tub of margarine on the table, then it would be okay according to the code of Jewish law. But if that was his ruling, very nice, no problem. Okay, now, the prohibition, by the way, of meat and milk is only when you're eating actual meat with actual milk. Sorry, kosher meat with kosher milk. But if you're not eating kosher meat with kosher milk, then it's not actually treif. So I'm not sure. Sorry, it is treif, but it's not actually meat and milk. Prohibition. The prohibition of mixing meat and milk is kosher meat with kosher milk. But if a cheeseburger is made out of bacon, I don't know what a cheeseburger is made out of. If the cheeseburger is made out of bacon, then the bacon is not a prohibition to be eaten with milk. It's only the kosher meat with the kosher milk. It's a different prohibition and a very, very severe prohibition, the prohibition of eating treif. And this is not a permission now to mix, to eat a cheeseburger, God forbid. But I'm just saying that we should be aware. The prohibition is eating kosher meat together with kosher milk. That is what's prohibited. And that's why, again, I don't know what cheeseburgers are made out of, but if they're made out of non-kosher cheeses, like let's say if it's cheese of a camel or cheese of, I don't know what kind of animal, of a donkey, or whatever cheeses you might be able to make out of, if it's not from a kosher animal, and if the meat is not from a kosher animal, then it's not a prohibition. When I say kosher milk, I do not mean only Chalav Israel. Chalav Israel is an upgrade of kosher milk. So the milk itself would be cow's milk is kosher. But in order to make sure that the cow's milk was not tampered with, that's why you have Chalav Yisrael, milk that was supervised by a Jew from the time of milking. When I say kosher milk, I'm talking about milk from a kosher animal. Chalav Yisrael is merely an upgrade. Andy, they are fake cheese-like foods, vegetable-based, dairy-free. Their flavor is like cheese, but they are dairy-free. They should be okay with the meat, correct, provided you're not in public, Marisain. And even if you are in public, it's okay, Andy, as long as it is clear and obvious that this is non-dairy cheese, right? So if you want to serve a cheeseburger in your kosher restaurant, here's what you do. You can just write fake cheeseburger. If you literally wrote fake cheeseburger, and they do that in a lot of kosher restaurants, they literally write fake, whatever. I never had a cheeseburger, but if you want to have like plant-based meats, some mushrooms actually taste like meat. It's unbelievable. They have like portobello mushroom burgers. It's unbelievable. The meat, the juice of the mushroom can almost taste like a piece of meat. If you want to have something which is like a fake cheeseburger and you call it a fake cheeseburger, it's okay. Or if you have actual dairy, non-dairy cheese and meat, if that's something which you're interested in having, then yeah, I mean, as long as you are able to explicitly state that it is non-dairy by, for example, the Code of Jewish Law says you just put the bottle of the non-dairy creamer on the table and people can see it and understand that it's this non-dairy creamer. Marty, you're right. This is why I would think that a cheeseburger is not kosher meat, because it's called a hamburger. So I would thinking that the hamburger is made out of ham. But really, if I'm not mistaken, it's not called a hamburger because of the ham. I think it's called a hamburger because it came from Hamburg. I think, maybe, I'm not sure. In any event, Hamburg, as opposed to the Frankfurter. I think Frankfurter came from Frankfurt, the hamburger came from Hamburg, but it's not necessarily ham inside the burger, it's a beef inside the burger. You know where the sandwich came from? The sandwich was invented by a prolific gambler. He was known as the Earl of Sandwich. The Earl of Sandwich. He would gamble all day and all night long to the point that he was not functioning. He wasn't eating. So his servants would serve him. He said to them, just give me a piece of meat stuffed between two pieces of bread and I'll just feed it to me while I gamble. And because his friends were also just as gambling as he was, as addicted, they would say to their waiters, you know what? Just give me the same as sandwich. Just give me the same as sandwich. The Earl of Sandwich, and that's how it became known as a sandwich. Good. Fantastic. All right, good. Let's even go just a little bit further here. If you're cooking parv in a fleishik dish, this is a very important principle. Remember how we spoke about the fact that it's the flavor that's prohibited? The flavor is prohibited, right? So it's the flavor of meat and the flavor of milk that is prohibited. But the question is, when does that become too diluted? Right? There's a very, very, very important principle with which I'm going to conclude today. Very practical. Let's say you cooked vegetables in a fleishik pot. Are those vegetables fleishik now? Are they meat? Let's say the last time you used that pot was 8 months ago for a chicken soup. And now 8 months later, you're taking this clean pot to cook vegetables. Does that make those vegetables fleishik? The answer is no. Even though the flavor of the meat went into the walls of the pot, and now the walls of the pot are evacuating the flavor of the meat into the vegetables, that is by no means considered by anybody to be a fleishik vegetable. Why? Because the flavor after 24 hours inside of the pot is considered expired. The principle is called ben yomo. Ben yomo means within its day, within 24 hours. If the pot was used for meat within 24 hours, and now you're using it again, the flavor is fresh and alive. But if you use the last time you used this pot, which you're now cooking vegetables in, or rice, so the rice that's cooking now is being cooked in a pot that was last used more than 24 hours ago for meat, the flavor inside of it is dead. It's considered dead flavor. It's not ben yomo. It's a very important principle. So after 24 hours, the flavor in the walls of the pot is dead. But let's talk about the case where you're making a rice now for dinner tonight. And last night, this pot was used to make a fleishik soup. So it's now last night at 8 o'clock, this pot was hot with fleishik soup inside, and now it's 5 o'clock today. And within 24 hours, using the same pot to cook rice, now the flavor is still alive. The meat flavor is still alive in the walls of the pot. But the flavor went from the meat in the soup into the walls of the pot, and now it's going from a clean pot inside the walls of the pot. It's going back into the rice. It's like a second generation. The soup gave flavor into the pot, and now the pot is giving flavor into the rice. In such a case, even if it is ben yomo within 24 hours, the rice that I'm cooking today within 24 hours in the meat pot is not considered fleishik, and you do not need to wait 6 hours after eating this rice. It's called nat bar nat. Nosen ta'am bar nosen ta'am, which basically means giving flavor, the son of giving flavor. It means second generation flavor. Since the flavor went from the soup to the walls of the pot, that was the first generation of flavor. Then it went from the flavor of the walls and the pot, went into the rice. That's a second generation of flavor. Nat bar nat, second generation, is not fleishik. This is a very, very important principle in kosher kitchens. Second generation is not considered fleishik or milchik. So again, to wrap that up, if the pot that you use, so you're cooking parav right now, you're making a pasta or you're making a, oops, my battery's about to die. You're making a pasta or you're making a, if the pot that you're using now is milchik or fleishik more than 24 hours ago is the last time that it was used, no problem, because the flavor died in the walls of the pot. If it was used within 24 hours, it's called ben yomo, within its day. The flavor now is alive in the walls of the pot, but since the pot is clean now, so went into the walls of the pot, that was first generation. From the walls of the pot, it went into the rice, now second generation. That's not fleishik. However, there's a slight difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic rule over here. According to the Sephardim, you're allowed to eat this rice together with milk, actually. This rice that was cooked, or this pasta that was cooked inside of a fleishik pot that was used within 24 hours, but it's a second generation flavor, you're allowed to actually put cheese on the pasta. For the Ashkenazim, however, you can't eat this rice or this pasta with dairy, but you don't have to wait after it for the opposite, for meat or dairy. So according to the Ashkenazim, it actually has, it's considered what we call chezkat basar or chezkat chalav, which means that it has the status of meat, the status of milk, but it doesn't actually have the full consequences of meat and milk. Full consequences would mean you have to wait the 6 hours after meat or the 1 hour after milk. It just means that it's considered in the status of meat that you can't mix it with the opposite, or the status of milk that you can't mix it with the opposite, but it doesn't mean that you have to wait after it. And that's the Ashkenazi rule. And that is a very fundamental principle in the laws of kosher kitchens, that when you're cooking parav, the laws of parav, very, very, very important to be able to understand how they work. It's that law of the second generation. Two things that we learned here. The one thing was that flavor expires within after 24 hours. And the second thing is that if the flavor is second generation, then it's considered at most, according to the Ashkenazim, the status of meat or the status of whatever that pot was before. But according to the Sephardim, forget about it. You can actually eat it together with the opposite. I hope that makes sense to you. Corey, I guess I don't understand how you can eat a steak and have to wait 6 hours. Or a cup of chicken soup with no actual chicken, also wait 6 hours, and the digestion time is totally different. Well, Corey, you must have missed the previous class, because we spoke about that in the previous class, that there's two elements to the waiting. One element is the stuff that gets stuck in your teeth, and the other one is the lining of the esophagus. So the oil of the meat and the oil of this chicken soup actually it lines the inside of your esophagus for the duration of 6 hours. It sits in the stomach lining for 6 hours, and that's the reason. Doesn't matter if it's steak or chicken soup, it's all the same thing. And if you had to start differentiating between different kinds of foods and different kinds of breakdowns, you drive yourself crazy, and that's why we make a general rule. It's 6 hours. Correct. It's not about digestion. It's about the flavor, according to one opinion. The other opinion says it is about the digestion, but we rule using both explanations that you should really listen to the previous class, because that's where we address this, Corey, at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Just find the class about how long to wait after meat for milk, where we went through this in great detail. My battery is about to die, folks, so I'm going to sign off over here and say thank you very much for joining me here today. Today at 11:30, Corey is going to give a class on Hebrew language through the Psalms of King David. It's at 11:30, jewishgardens.com/Zoom, the Zoom room, the Chabad Zoom room. Today afternoon, you're not supposed to learn any Torah. Afternoon today, you're not supposed to learn any Torah all the way through till midnight, because it is Erev Xmas, and it is the time when the power of idolatry is powerful in the world. We don't add to that power through the study of Torah. It's only night of the year that we don't really study Torah, even though it's always an mitzvah to study Torah. So we don't study Torah on this night. We play chess with each other with our kids. That's what the Rebbes of Chabad would do. So Corey's class is going to end before 12:19, which is when the when the prohibition of Torah study comes into effect today. Tonight there will not be a JLI class, Secrets of the Bible, because obviously we're not allowed to study Torah tonight. Tomorrow is a fast day. It is one of the second most powerful fast day of the year after Yom Kippur. It is a fast day that does override Shabbat, whereas no other fast days override Shabbat except for Yom Kippur. And this fast, the 10th of Teves. 10th of Teves commemorates the breach of the walls of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and according to some opinions by the Romans as well, in the Second Temple as well. But it is a very sad day. We fast from morning until night. Check your Jewish calendar. You'll see the fast begins tomorrow morning at 5:49 a.m. and it ends tomorrow night at 6:01 p.m. So hope everything goes well. Don't forget to fast. You can read up about it. Maybe I'll post to the WhatsApp groups a little bit about Asar B'Teves. Elaine, I don't really understand the question. Would the composition of the pot signify? I'm not sure what you're saying. I don't understand the question. I think you're asking, does it matter what the pots are made out of, is what I think you're asking. And the answer is yes. It does make a difference what the pots are made out of when it comes to koshering the pots. However, when it comes to infusing flavor into foods that cooked into it, it doesn't really make a difference. The flavor will always come out into the food that's in it. So that doesn't really matter vis-a-vis infusion of flavor into para foods. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. Shalom and have a great day.